Just a reminder, I'm not going to accept any Ghostbusters 2 shit on this one. The movie's fucking awesome. Alright, I just got back from seeing Ghostbusters Afterlife, so I'm going to do a little review. I should probably put the Neutrona one down and take my coat off, though. Hey again. So, just got back from Ghostbusters Afterlife, so it's very fresh in my head. This is going to be a spoiler review. So, if you want to go in completely fresh, or at least as fresh as you can be from the trailers, come back to this after you've seen the movie. If you're okay with spoilers, hi. First off, so I went to go see this at the Alamo Drafthouse, as I usually see movies at, because that's my favorite theater in the area. And they had a special drink menu. Mini puffed! They actually didn't have one of these at my table, because I had a front row ticket, and they always forget the front row for shit like that. So I ended up swiping this off some table that no one was sitting at, just so I could have it, because I wanted it, because it's big, and he's got his little tongue sticking out, it's cute. But, as you can see, there was one alcoholic drink and one non-alcoholic drink. They called the non-alcoholic drink Ecto Cooler, even though I think that's trademarked by High C. But since they're only, like, giving away Ecto Cooler this year, if you, like, happen to tweet something to them and they like it, I've tweeted them a couple times, they're not sending me a bottle of Ecto Cooler. But, you know, I figured I'd get this. So I got both of these drinks. The Ecto Cooler tasted close enough to High C. It definitely tasted like they used real juice as opposed to whatever sugary syrup concoction that High C uses. I mean, it's mostly just kind of tangerines, but it tasted good. The ectoplasmic residue, I like that quite a bit. Even though there's no whiskey in it, it almost had like a weird whiskey flavor, but it's gin, ginger liqueur, botanical spirit, which I think might have been like a rosemary or a thyme, but like distilled into a liqueur almost, and then honey, lime, and soda. So a bunch of shit I like. But that was really good. So yeah, got that. Mini puffs. They also gave you, I guess if you were, I don't know if they're just doing it for opening weekend, but the Alamo Drafthouse has this thing called the letterpress, where they usually make like sometimes these special posters or postcards. I remember when I went to go see Godzilla v. Kong, they had a postcard for that as well, and I've kept them as I get them. And I have a poster, you can see it in some of my other videos, of the AGFA Horror Trailer Show. They made a special poster if you went to go see that on Real Film Day, which was like 3 weeks before the world shut down for COVID back in 2020. They do stuff like that, but they had a special postcard for the OG Ghostbusters, and then this is just kind of what it looks like. So, that was cool. They dropped this off when they dropped off the check. Anyway, in the pre-show at Alamo, they had different commercials. They had like a couple like Ghostbuster rip-off videos from around the world, like Hong Kong movies and stuff like that, as well as some fan films. And then they showed commercials for different Ghostbuster products back in the 80s, like the tie-ins when Ghostbusters 2 came out, and real Ghostbusters action figures and stuff. It was really fun. But the movie itself. So, when they finally announced this movie and we started to see the materials for it, my hope was that it would, as far as like these belated sequels where, you know, they had like an original movie or an original couple movies decades ago and the public wanted more, but for some reason either the studio or the talent involved didn't want to make it. But now that IP is king in this this new Hollywood that's about streaming and using, you know, recognizable properties, we're getting all of these belated sequels. So sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're Zoolander 2, but you know, or Anchorman 2, which wasn't very good either. But of these belated sequels, the ones that we wanted a sequel contemporaneous to when the others came out, but we didn't get it, and now we're getting it long after we actually wanted it, though we still kind of want it. Of these belated sequels, and I think I said this when I reviewed one of the trailers for this movie, it seems like, to me, the best of those has been Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai, it introduced new characters. It still has like passing the torch elements, but it still spends a lot of time with the original characters. It is still tonally and thematically the same as the previous iterations. but it still does things to move it forward into the next generation. You know, it's still, maybe it twists up the formula a little bit, you know, stuff like that. And on the other side, the way not to do it is The Force Awakens, where it is just a beat-for-beat remake, where it doesn't give you what you want from the old characters, where they're just kind of like shoehorned in, where there's like no originality, where the exposition as far as what happened between the movies is shit, where you basically just reset the clock as if the previous movies almost never happened. You know, defeat the Empire, but now there's a new Empire called the First Order, and for some reason only 30 years have elapsed, but no one fucking remembers the most giant political cosmic event that has happened in everyone's lifetime. You know, people not knowing about like Luke Skywalker and the Force and the Force Awakens is like if 20-year-olds, however old Rey's supposed to be, let's say 18. That'd be like if 18-year-olds in 2031 had never heard of 9/11 in the United States. It makes no fucking sense. It's fucking stupid. I hate The Force Awakens. So when I went to Ghostbusters Afterlife, I was hoping it would be more Cobra Kai and less Force Awakens. And what it is it's not quite Cobra Kai, but it's definitely a lot better than The Force Awakens. There's still a lot of fan service, callbacks, Easter eggs, repeat stuff. All the stuff that the negative reviews of this movie are saying are in it, it has those too. But it has enough of what I was hoping for that I didn't mind when it did do some, like, copy-repeat stuff. It's not just a copy-paste thing. I know, I love Ghostbusters 2, and a lot of people who don't like that movie, by the way, they're all wrong, and probably war criminals. But people who don't like Ghostbusters 2, what they don't like about it is that the story progresses almost beat for beat the way that the first Ghostbusters does. Obviously, there's a different villain, different specific events happen, but it kind of follows the same, like, formula or structure. Kind of like how every episode of House follows the same structure. This Afterlife doesn't quite do that. It doesn't follow exactly the same structure, though it does hit different types of beats like that. Let me not bury the lead. I loved 2/3 of this movie, and I really liked 1/3 of this movie. But I didn't love all of the movie. My feelings were never negative toward the movie. This isn't the abomination that Paul Feig's 2016 was. This is overall quite a very good movie, and I did love most of it. So as far as my opinion goes, you know, thumbs up. But I do have some caveats. But let me kind of talk about what they did for the setup of this. So this is directed by Jason Reitman, who is obviously the son of Ivan Reitman, who directed Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Jason Reitman doesn't have anything in his filmography that feels like Ghostbusters 1 or 2. If you look at his movies, they're usually either kind of sad dramedies, like Young Adult, or they're dark comedies like Thank You for Smoking and Up in the Air and stuff like that. He has a good eye toward character, and he has a good eye toward mixing drama and comedy together so that they both complement each other but don't take away from each other. And he brings a lot of that to this movie. This movie, the tone of it feels a lot like Young Adult did. Maybe it tips a little bit more into comedy at some parts. But it definitely feels like, you know, if you stripped away the ghosts, this could very much be an indie dramedy about a family moving to rural Oklahoma because they're on hard times and adjusting and coming of age and stuff. This could easily be Licorice Pizza 2021 Oklahoma if there were no ghosts in it. And I think it plays to the strengths. But my biggest problem, I had a lot of problems with the 2016 Ghostbusters, Answer the Call, but my biggest problem with that one is that it got the tone completely wrong for Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters 1 and 2, they are comedies, yes, but they have a very specific tone, which is that they are basically comedic characters, not overly broad, like Judd Apatow comedic characters. They're more like sarcastic, a little sly, sometimes a little witty, like SCTV and 70s, early 80s SNL comedy. But you have these comedic characters in a mostly, like, serious world where, you know, the stakes are considered real, the ghosts, even though some of the ghosts are funny, they're not treated as, like, a joke, if that makes sense. It's like the stakes are real, the universe is like a horror movie serious universe, but the characters themselves are comedic, but not overly broad in a way. And this Ghostbusters Afterlife is kind of the same thing, where for a while this movie is where it has that sort of serious, like, dramedy tone, and the stakes are still real when they happen. I would argue that maybe they don't do as good of a job in the third act of making the stakes feel as apocalyptic as they keep saying. I mean, they quote that Revelations quote from Ghostbusters 1 a bunch of times, and Ray has it tattooed on his arm, as you see in the trailer, and it's spray-painted outside of Egon's dirt farmhouse and everything. But it never feels like the world could end at that moment. That's one of my caveats with the stakes here, but otherwise it still feels like serious stakes, despite this being a comedy. It is very weird that the trailers for this movie didn't really show a lot of the comedy, because this is actually a pretty damn funny movie. Because, I mean, another problem with 2016, and I hate to keep mentioning that movie because it doesn't deserve to be brought up, but is that it just wasn't funny. I've said this in numerous other videos, and when I wrote a review for that for WordPress way back when, but when I went to go see the 2016 one, I was in a theater that was a third full. I laughed once, and no one else in the theater laughed at all. It was like everyone was sitting politely at a bus stop waiting to get off. It was kind of bad. This movie's really funny. There's a lot of jokes that just kind of had me like, ha, there's no like gut busting, like, oh, I'm clutching my chest because I'm losing my breath funny. But there's a lot of really funny stuff in this. Like, I don't think a full 5 minutes of this movie passed until like the third act, when things start getting a bit more like serious and Ghostbustery, that I wasn't laughing about something. This is actually quite a funny movie, and it's weird that they almost didn't put any of that humor in the trailers, which is odd. But they got the tone of this movie right, and that was probably the biggest thing that I was happy. Like, as I'm watching this movie in the first act, the second act, third act gets a little bit jokier, but it never tips over into Paul Feig. So I was very happy that it kind of got the tone right. The tone still felt like it belonged in the same universe as Ghostbusters 1 and 2. So I was worried about a couple things going into this, because going into this, I knew the basic setup, that Egon had died. I mean, Harold Ramis died in real life, rip. But that he had an estranged daughter, and his daughter had 2 kids, Finn Wolfhard and Mckenna Grace. So he has 2 grandkids, and they move to his Oklahoma house, and then they find out that, hey, Ivo Shandor, who built the Ghostbusters building that Dana Barrett and Louis Tully were living in, also happened to have this mine in this Oklahoma rural thing, and all that stuff is happening. But I was worried about this, because we know from Ghostbusters 2 that Egon fucked the pink slime. He fucked the mood slime. So we know that, so it is canonical even before this movie that Egon fucks. So we got that. But I was trying to figure out, like, how old is Carrie Coons supposed to be? In fact, actually, I'm going to Google that right now. Because the movie does take place in 2021. There's actually a part in the movie where they solidify the date. I thought maybe this took place in 2019, since Ghostbusters 2 is 89. If it's been 30 years, that's 2019. And also the movie was supposed to come out in 2020. But then COVID happened. So maybe they put a little digital thing. But the movie takes place in 2021. No one wears a mask, and COVID didn't happen in this universe, but that's fine. I wish COVID didn't happen in this universe. So the time frame is still there. But I was just wondering, because there's no mention of Egon having a girlfriend or a bastard child in Ghostbusters 1 or 2, and those still happened in 84 and 89. All right, so Carrie Coon is 40. So she's 2 years older than me, so assuming that Carrie Coon's character, she plays Egon Spengler's daughter, assuming her character is also 40 years old in the movie, that means that Egon's daughter was born 4 years before the first Ghostbusters, when Egon is just a guy with a PhD who teaches at Columbia in their parapsychology program, because Columbia has a parapsychology program. So the movie doesn't go into any of that. It doesn't explain who is the mother of Egon's child. It briefly kind of discusses who the father of Carrie Coons, who the grandchildren are. But it doesn't at all go into who Egon slept with and had a kid with, why he was estranged from her even before those events or anything. I mean, it's quite possible that Carrie Coon is playing a couple years younger than she is, in which case maybe this happened after Ghostbusters 2 or between Ghostbusters 1 and Ghostbusters 2. Maybe Egon diddled his lab assistant when he's talking about taking away the puppy from that girl. I don't know. But it doesn't go into any of that. Does it need to? Not really. I was mostly just kind of curious if he ended up hooking up with Janine. The answer seems to be no from this movie. Janine is still in his life, but is sort of just kind of working as like almost like a glorified caretaker or a secretary almost for him. I mean, she was a secretary for the Ghostbusters, so that makes sense. We also don't know if Janine ended up with Louis Tully after their little dalliance in Ghostbusters 2, but I don't know. So we don't really get much of that. We do find out basically what happened after Ghostbusters 2. Because I was worried that they were going to Force Awakens it. I was worried that, even though, there was a giant event that happened in '84, the Ghostbusters were bankrupted out of business from lawsuits and people thought they were fake, and then Ghostbusters 2 happens, where they make the Statue of Liberty walk across the Hudson down to the Museum of Modern Art, and then they replant the Statue of Liberty, and there's a Thank You Ghostbusters celebration. I was worried that they were going to pretend that this big event that would probably be well known in this world was forgotten, and they don't go that way. They basically take the idea that Ghostbusters 1 and 2 happened. They don't really mention Ghostbusters 2, but Ray has his bookstore, so Ghostbusters 2 is canon, and if you try to not make Ghostbusters 2 canon, I will hunt you down and beat you. But I love Ghostbusters 2. But it's more like, after the events of Ghostbusters 2, the Ghostbusters were so good at catching ghosts that eventually they caught most of the ghosts that were active, so that there wasn't enough to keep their business going. So sort of a supply and demand thing, where basically they were too good at their job, and so there was no longer that much of a job. That it's not that all the ghost activity stopped, which I was worried about that, because it's like, Gozer's in the first movie, Gozer's in this movie, so what was Vigo? Like, is Vigo connected to Gozer? Is all ghost activity only tied to Gozer? And it doesn't go there. It just kind of goes that after a while, the ghost activity became few and far between because they were too good at it, and then they kind of went their separate ways. But Egon was worried that something big was going to happen. The other three thought he was crazy, and so Egon absconded with 99% of their equipment and cut ties with them. Which Egon has always kind of been coded as autistic, and that's probably why Egon was always my favorite Ghostbuster, now that I know I am autistic, which is odd because Dan Aykroyd is, in real life, actually autistic, and I don't think Harold Ramis was. And that seems like a very autistic Egon Spengler thing to do. And then we find out, Ray kind of runs his bookstore that doesn't turn a profit, but Winston has become like a venture capitalist and is keeping afloat, and Bill Murray went back to academia. It doesn't explicitly state what happened between Venkman and Dana Barrett. Dana Barrett is briefly in this movie, but there's a couple shots of Bill Murray's hand where he's wearing a wedding ring. So I choose to believe that Venkman and Dana got married. I'd like to know what happened to Oscar, if that's the case, Dana's son Oscar. But it doesn't explain as much stuff that I kind of wish it explained, but I also know that if it tried to explain that stuff, it would drag the narrative down terribly. But I was happy that they didn't try to Force Awakens it like, oh, this giant event happened, but no one remembers it because the screenwriters are fucking idiots. Fucking J.J. Abrams. So they didn't go there. But that's about it. For the main Ghostbusters, they're not in as much of the movie as I wanted to be, but I also kind of expected that they'd only be in the movie as much as they are. We get enough moments with them. Some of their moments are maybe a bit too cutesy. Like, there's a couple of moments in the movie where they don't feel like they're the Ghostbusters. They feel like they are Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, and Eddie Hudson doing a sketch for an award show or a late night thing. They don't quite feel like they're playing their characters. They feel like they're themselves doing a skit on a late night show sometimes. Kind of like when Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd appear on Jimmy Kimmel, but they're not, you know. A couple of moments feel like that, and then a couple of moments feel genuine. But I wish there was more of them, but it makes sense for this narrative. If they end up making another Ghostbusters after this, and there's a mid-credit and an end-credit and a post-credit sequence in this movie, and the post-credit sequence does set up some stuff, kind of. So I hope we'd get a little more of them. Like, even if Bill Murray doesn't want to be in the next one, because famously, the reason we didn't get the Ghostbusters 3 we always wanted is because Bill Murray didn't want to do it. And then also, Bill Murray was going through some personal stuff, and him and Harold Ramis had a falling out during Groundhog Day and didn't speak for a while. And then finally, Bill Murray patched it up with Harold Ramis just before Ramis died. But we never got the Ghostbusters 3 we wanted. We did get... Sorry, should have grabbed this before. We did get Ghostbusters the video game, which sort of was the de facto Ghostbusters 3. But events of this movie make this not canon anymore. So this is no longer canon. I guess you can consider it canon if you want, and if you happen to not like Afterlife, you can consider this canon. But this was, and also the story of this was written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, so I kind of wish they had found a way to keep this canon, but they didn't, so it is what it is. I recently replayed it. It's really only non-canon because it goes into Ivo Shandor, and Ivo Shandor is in this movie, briefly. I won't spoil who plays him, but it's someone who is... Well, if I say this, it'll spoil it. It's someone who's in, I think, every one of Jason Reitman's movies. So... but I also... One other thing about Ivo Shandor, who doesn't play a big part in this movie... his body is lying in a Lenin-type casket in this movie. Now, this movie isn't overly political, but I've mentioned this before. The first Ghostbusters has a very strong libertarian streak, where you have a couple guys, they're kicked out of academia, so they start a small business, and the person who's really against them is the government bureaucracy of the EPA. Now, Ghostbusters is one of the big examples I point to where you don't have to agree with the movie's politics to love the movie. I obviously adore Ghostbusters. I am by no stretch of the imagination some libertarian asshole, but Ghostbusters had been libertarian. Ghostbusters Afterlife has a couple tinges of libertarianism, and that is basically Ray Stantz makes a reference to the good Reagan 80s. Winston is a venture capitalist. And Ivo Shandor, who is a negative evil figure, and portrayed in this movie as sort of a dupe, like a foolish person, is laying in a Lenin-type casket. Also, the fact that Egon kind of became like a crazy conspiracy theorist out in the middle of nowhere is a little right-wingy. So, this movie, it doesn't push any of that. It's all in the background. You can ignore it if you want to. But it still kind of has those tinges of libertarianism that the first Ghostbusters had. Which is, the Ghostbusters 2 is fairly apolitical as far as these things go. But it has some of that. Didn't affect my enjoyment of the film. I'm perfectly fine with the Ghostbusters having a politics that are not my super left-wing communist ones. So, I'm fine with that. But aside from all of that, like, exposition-y stuff, I'm okay with what they did explain and what they didn't explain. I just kind of wish we had more time with them, and I wish the OG Ghostbusters, and I wish some of their scenes, they felt more like they were still playing those characters and not like they're doing a late-night comedy sketch where they're kind of doing them. Kind of like when Harold Ramis played, like, Egon Spengler's, like, twin brother for that, like, Earth Day special. Does anyone remember that? He was like Elon Spengler or something? I don't know. So let me say, this movie is very much in the vein of like an 80s kids take on the world movie. So you got like Goonies, Explorers, Monster Squad. If you go a little bit more recent, then sure, Stranger Things, Finn Wolfhard's in this, so that's obviously a part of it. And Super 8, which was something I actually liked from J.J. Abrams. Go figure. It's definitely of that type, but it doesn't feel like kiddie cutesy about it. This is also not as much of an ensemble piece as I was expecting, because obviously Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 are very much ensemble pieces. Some people might argue that this Ghostbuster or that Ghostbuster gets all the best lines or has the best thing. Like, my favorite's Egon. I'd say that the average person's favorite is probably Peter Venkman. But it's still mostly an ensemble. Winston he's always gotten the short end of the stick. I hope if they make another one, they move Winston a little bit more to the front. Especially because Ernie Hudson still goes to conventions and wears the Ghostbuster suit and everything. So, plus, he was great on Oz. Ernie Hudson needs to get more respect, is what I'm saying. But this isn't as much of an ensemble piece. Like, Finn Wolfhard doesn't do much in this movie. He like repairs the Ecto-1 and he drives it a little bit and he has a crush on a girl. But he doesn't do that much. There's a character named Podcast. His shtick is that he sort of narrates everything to his podcast that only one person listens to. I could very much see that character being annoying if he weren't written as well as he is. But I actually like the character. The character has some race dance vibes to him. I actually found him charming. And then there's this other girl named Lucky, who's like the sheriff's daughter. And Finn Wolfhard's character has a crush on her. She doesn't get much to do. We don't really know much about that character aside from her relation. And she has a couple of good one-liners, though. One of the liners seems like it came out of Hocus Pocus, but still. But really, this movie is anchored by Mckenna Grace as Phoebe Spangler. By the way, apropos of nothing, I have my cat, Karl Marx, as you might have seen in some videos. Prior to Karl, I had a cat named Phoebe. She was alive for 11 years, and I loved her dearly. So the fact that I had a cat named Phoebe, and this character who's the granddaughter of Egon is named Phoebe, that sort of... maybe because I had a cat with that name, I sort of was engendered to this character a little bit, so I don't know. But Mckenna Grace does an excellent job with this role, because she pretty much is the star and the focal point of this movie. Mckenna Grace has been really good in other stuff. She didn't have much to do in Designated Survivor, which I had binged during COVID. But she had a supporting role in the most recent season of Handmaid's Tale, and she was really good in that. And I was very, very delighted by her performance in this, because the character she plays is 12. And her character, the way she portrays this character, feels to a T perfect of if you were taking Harold Ramis's Egon Spangler, but instead of a 30-something-year-old dude in 1984, it was a 12-year-old girl. She does a great job of embodying Harold Ramis in this. Like, I don't know if she studied like the mannerisms and the line delivery. I don't know if director Jason Reitman worked with her on getting it, but she is like pitch perfect in this movie. Like, basically, this movie would not be a success if her performance was not spot on, and it is. Because this really isn't an ensemble piece. This is her show, and she nails it. So, as far as child actors go, this is like at the top. Like, this is great. Like, I hope that if they make another one of these, that they kind of stick to her. Like, I'd still like it to kind of be an ensemble piece. I mean, Finn Wolfhard and Lucky aren't... I could take them or leave them. I do like Podcast. Maybe they could expand on him a little bit. But I hope that it follows her. Like if we had like 9 Ghostbuster movies after this that were just about like the progression of Phoebe Spangler, I would be totally okay with that. The fact that her character was so likable and so good in this movie helped cushion the blow of the original 3 Ghostbusters not being in as much of the movie as I wanted to. Egon's kind of in it. An actor plays Egon at the beginning of the movie, and he's kind of shown in shadow. I looked at the credits to see who it was. It's Bob Gunton, the warden of the Shawshank Redemption. And then, back when they were talking about making a Ghostbusters 3, Bill Murray had this like random demand. It's like, I'll only be in it if Venkman is a ghost. Which has always kind of been odd because the Ghostbusters universe has never quite explained who becomes a ghost and why they take the form they do, because there's a couple like zombie type ghosts both in this one and in the original, but none of the ghosts really look all that human. Like Gozer's the most human looking one, and I guess Vigo as well. Like Slimer doesn't look like a human. Muncher in this movie doesn't look like a human. Stay Puft is puffed. He's not really a ghost though. He's more of a manifestation. But anyway. But so they don't really explain how, like, your average Joe or Jane would look or become a ghost. Does everyone become a ghost? Only some people become ghosts? The Ghostbusters universe has never really answered this question. It doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of curious. But we do get a CGI ghost of Harold Ramis in this movie. I'm always a little iffy about bringing dead actors back to life for movies without their permission. I mean, I guess they have to get the estate's permission, and that's fine. It's done about as well in this movie as I can expect it to be done. I'll say that. I'm okay. I didn't mind how it's done in this movie. It's still a little weird, but, there's also some funny moments about it, too. So, yeah, we get that. Carrie Coons, she was actually a surprise in this movie. I really liked her in Gone Girl, but I don't think I've actually seen her in all that much besides that, but I don't know what I was expecting her character to be like based on the trailers, but she's not that. Her character is actually very dry and Venkman-like, which I actually really liked and really appreciated. So for whatever, she doesn't have too much screen time. She's, solid supporting character. About as much screen time as maybe Louis Tully, Rick Moranis had in the original, maybe. So she doesn't, but I really liked how they did that character, where she's a little bit acerbic and has a little bit of an edge there. Paul Rudd is pretty funny in this. He has a lot of really good lines. Paul Rudd is kind of the audience stand-in for every late 30s, early 40s fan of Ghostbusters, where he knows about the stuff that happened in the 80s. And, he knows what a ghost trap is. He recognizes it. He geeks out about that stuff. He's basically an audience surrogate for the older audience. I assume Mckenna Grace or maybe one of the other kids might be an audience surrogate for the younger fans who are just getting into it or whose parents pushed them into it now that we're this old. But Paul Rudd is definitely the audience surrogate for people like me. And he's very good in this. There's only one moment between Carrie Coons and Paul Rudd I don't like in the movie, and it's when, after they've both been possessed by Zool, the gatekeeper and the keymaster, and they first meet up, to fuck. That scene where they're meeting up and the way they deliver their lines, that feels a little Judd Apatow-y. That's the only part, the only moment of humor in the movie that struck me completely wrong was that moment, but that's about it. Otherwise, it's fine. And people who complain that this is kind of repeating the first one, it sort of makes sense that Gozer has the specific steps that need to be taken for Gozer to come back, and so those steps would repeat. It seems it has a certain internal logic to it, so I didn't mind, even if some other critics and stuff did. So the movie it follows, it spends a lot of time with character, which works. There's this good running gag of Phoebe sort of telling these, like, set-up punchline jokes. Some of them are really funny. There's one about a cigarette and a hamster I really enjoyed quite a bit. And you get some exposition that Ivo Shandor, he built this entire town, and the materials that built that building in New York come from this mine, and all that good stuff. And you get, you get them discovering the equipment, testing the equipment, all of that kind of stuff. It's all really fun. It's all really funny. It all makes sense with a good plot progression. I enjoyed it. you get the oh wow moments of the Ecto-1 coming out and all that stuff. All that stuff worked for me. I truly did love the entire first and second act of this movie, and there was only a couple quibbles about the third act that brought it down to just a really, really like, as opposed to a love the whole thing holistically. Most of the mini puff stuff has been in the promotional materials, so there's not much with the mini puffs that in the movie that isn't in the trailers. There's only a little bit. They're adorable and they're funny. I love them. Muncher is a lot cuter in the movie than I expected him to be. He's like this tardigrade that eats metal. I really enjoyed him. He looked very cuddly. He's definitely this movie's version of Slimer. I guess this is the only Ghostbuster movie that doesn't have Slimer then, because even the fucking 2016 piece of shit did. But Muncher is like the Slimer surrogate, and he's really cool. There's some new gadgets and stuff. There's a lot of that funny stuff. I'm not going to go beat for beat through the story, but it worked. Almost all of it. 99% of this movie worked for me. And it's not just because I was drinking ectoplasmic residue. It really worked. I'm not going to say who they cast to play Gozer, but it's kind of perfect. They cast a fairly famous actress. She does more than that now, but a fairly famous actress to play Gozer. I would also think Halsey would be perfect to play Gozer now that I think about it. She has the same facial features. But aside from Halsey, the actress that they cast is pretty perfect to play Gozer. I just wish that they kind of did a little bit more on the stakes, that it felt a little bit more apocalyptic. I mean, Ghostbusters 2 has, like, Ghost Titanic and giant ghosts trapezing through New York City and people's fur coats coming to life. That one felt, like, grand and operatic almost. And the first Ghostbusters, you know, it seemed like ghosts were, like, all over New York City. This movie, you get Muncher, you get the zombie miner in the cafe that you see, but it doesn't feel as apocalyptic on this town as it could, so that's a minor quibble about it. And then there's my quibble about the Ghostbusters, the OG Ghostbusters performances not quite feeling all that accurate to it. It feels a little bit winky at the camera at sometimes. When Gozer asks, "Are you a god?" I was hoping the reply would have been an affirmative, yes, yes I am. They don't quite play it that way, but they play it a little bit. You know? It's a little more winky than I would have liked, but, you know. But overall, because I've been prattling on for 37 minutes about this now, overall, I really, really like this. It's not the Ghostbusters 3 that we wanted or were hoping for. That ship has sailed. If we were going to get that Ghostbusters 3, it would have happened in, like, 1996. It's too late. We're not going to get it. We did get the video game. Bill Murray kind of phoned in his voiceover performance in there, and it's not a movie, it's a video game, but, you know, and it's not canon anymore. But we're never going to get the Ghostbusters 3 we wanted. And, you know, we have to live with that. If we can't get that movie, is this the next best thing? Yeah. Aside from, like, a couple little quibbles I have that I've already talked about, this is about as good of a belated Ghostbuster sequel as I could expect. It's not quite at that Cobra Kai level, as in terms of relation to the materials that came before it, but it's better than I was hoping for. It's better than I could have expected. I truly and utterly enjoyed it, and I will buy this on 4K when it comes out and watch it several times. Several hundred times, probably, because I fucking love Ghostbusters. I do hope they make another one, and that even if Bill Murray doesn't want to be in it, and he just wants to make 900 other shitty Wes Anderson movies that fucking suck. French Dispatch fucking sucked, by the way. You can read my review on Letterboxd. Wes Anderson, The Emperor Has No Clothes. So, you know, Bill Murray wants to make a bunch of those fucking movies. That's fine. If you just, you know, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, they appreciate Ghostbusters. They love Ghostbusters. They'll come back for it. Bring them back. Amy Potts, who in Ghostbusters 2 was responsible for a lot of my fetishes as an adult, I realized when I rewatched that movie a few years back. I watched it more recently than that too, but I remember watching it sometime in my early 30s or late 20s, and I was like, oh, that's where that came from. That makes sense now. I did see Ghostbusters II in the theater in 1989 when I was 5 years old, so, by the way. I was two months before being 6, so yeah, it makes sense, that earworm. I would have liked more Janine in this movie. She's a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the end. I also would have liked more Dana Barrett. She's only in the mid-credit sequence. And I wish they had more explained if... I wish they would have explicitly stated if Dana and Peter Venkman are married. I'm going to go ahead and say they are. Fuck it. Whatever. There's nothing to contradict me. And he's wearing a wedding ring, so yeah, they're married. Wonder what Oscar's doing, though. But this is about as good as we could have expected, I think. Yeah. I'm happy with it. I'm actually more than happy. I'm fairly delighted with it, to be quite honest. I did not expect it to be this good. I would have settled for like a B, and this movie is probably a low A for me. I'll decide if it's 4 or 4.5 stars on Letterboxd when I put this up later. Yeah, I was happy. I didn't cry. I didn't cry during it though, so you know. And it really makes me happy that now that we have this movie, we can probably just forget that 2016 ever happened. I mean, the year fucking sucked too. But we can forget that Paul Feig thing happened. That never happened. That was a bad dream. Now, we have Ghostbusters, we have Ghostbusters 2, and now we have Ghostbusters Afterlife. That's all we have. Those are the only movies. Nothing else happened. No. There was that Funimation cartoon. That wasn't too bad. We have the video game. It's not canon anymore. Some comic books. Yeah. Paul Feig? No, he did Freaks and Geeks. He's never done anything that sucked. But anyway, that's my rambling thoughts. It's almost 11 p.m. And I'm gonna try to put this up and then go to bed because I still have work tomorrow. So thanks for watching. Go see the movie so that we can get another sequel. And Bustin' makes me feel good.